Good to meet you, David.
I tapped on the transmitter.
I'm so relieved to not be alone down here. Getting your response makes everything I've went through worthwhile. By your statement, I take it there are others?
Likewise, Commander. Yes, there are a number of us. We've been holed up since it all began. So you were on the ISS. Our unit has been waiting for the right moment and circumstances to reactivate. We've just been biding our time. It was brilliant of you to use Morse code to contact us. So few people know it anymore. Luckily, I did. It's unlikely the aliens would know it either, but I wasn't about to take any chances and risk our safety until I'd cleared you. We're also in touch with several other survivor groups.
There were so many good things within those incoming broadcast dots and dashes. It was amazing. I wanted to ask Major Hubbard their location, but I figured he was still nervous and wanted to maintain operational security a little bit longer. It never occurred to me before, but then the same paranoid idea entered my mind that they might be aliens posing as survivors, so I'd let my guard down. Keeping our locations secret from each other in the beginning was a mission safety mechanism. David and I talked back and forth for a couple days to discuss pertinent details and vet each other. Little by little, he disclosed more information about their people, and I was greatly encouraged. They were a National Guard unit who quickly took shelter in a government bunker. That building was luckily shielded from the alien sterilization. Via very old-school military communication equipment, they were in semi-regular contact with a few other pockets of survivors across the county. A few of the groups were even outside the continental U.S. Not all of the survivors were armed service members, though. Some were survivalist nuts, coal miners, deep-sea divers, or just fortunate souls from different walks of life who'd managed to avoid extermination, either from dumb luck or happy coincidence. Regardless, every person who'd beaten the odds had different life experiences and brought unique perspectives to the table. It was us versus them, and the more individuals we had on the side of humanity, the better our chances of reversing the apocalypse we are mired in. After a half-dozen chats with David and his hidden group, I decided to spill the beans and reveal my location. The barriers of distrust had crumbled. I think he was just waiting for me, and I was waiting on him. I explained where the radar station was, and suggested we all work together if they, and the other splinter groups they were in contact with, were close enough to travel to Huntsville. I told David all about Max's capabilities, and how I had him hardwired to an old desktop PC. Their rations were almost exhausted, so it wasn't a difficult decision. Under the cover of darkness, the National Guard Regiment hoped to reach Huntsville in 3 or 4 nights. They were only one state over in Savannah, Georgia. David informed the other factions about his unit's plan to leave the bunker and join with me. I encouraged him to suggest they do the same, but to travel in staggered stages to avoid detection. Any slip-up or capture could derail our momentum and possibly be a death sentence for us. Most of them did not have telegraph communication capability. They would have to travel in radio silence over a great distance, and we would have no means of knowing their status. David provided them with Max's alien patrol schedule so they could map a safe route and avoid drawing attention to themselves. It was the only help we could offer. After that, I rigged up a looped message to broadcast on repeat, in case there were other survivors. In the end, I decided to not use it. The aliens were technically savvy. I was afraid they might become aware of the rogue broadcast and zero in on us. Sending it out before was a gamble on my part because there didn't seem to be much to lose. Once I'd confirmed there were others, the risks were too great to continue. There was a real danger in expanding the operation too rapidly. On the way back to the command center, I scouted for food sources. We'd soon have a lot more mouths to feed. There was a major grocery store chain supply hub just a few miles down the road. It was perfect for resources. I loaded up the back seat with bulk necessities and carried them into the building. Max was enthusiastically happy I returned. I'd taught him to greet me like Norm, or cheers, whenever I enter the room. I wonder if he considered the possibility I might be dead from my dangerous mission. If I never returned to the command center, would he remain working on the data and parameters indefinitely? Or would he eventually give up on a mission that was pointless? I didn't know what his programming would dictate, nor what his intuitive learning module might realize. Being tethered to a 1990s computer processor was definitely a potential handicap in itself.
I found other human survivors. They are on the way here to work with us on the mission.
His display visibly brightened upon hearing the positive news. I might have thought I'd imagined the whole thing or there was a power surge, but the pitch in his simulated voice softened too and went up part of an octave. I could hardly believe what I'd just witnessed. Max had apparently taken it upon himself to adjust the computer brightness and volume settings to emulate human-like expressions of good feelings and empathy. Just like his fragile, carbon-based makers, our little man was growing up. Max was evolving. When Major Hubbard's reserve unit arrived, I hurried them inside and showed them around the command center. There were living quarters on the premises down below, but not nearly enough to handle 45 new people. David and I assigned quarters for the extra members of his troops, using a number of unused offices. It was crowded, but according to them, practically spacious, compared to the cramped bunker they left. That night we ate a hearty meal and gave thanks for having the opportunity to fight another day. The Major requested a detailed rundown of all my experiences since the invasion. My coded explanation earlier over the airwaves had been rudimentary. He hoped to capitalize on some detail which hadn't occurred to me. As I soon discovered, he's quite a cunning strategist. I described the interior of their spacecraft, the landing site location, and also Max's crucial observations. At first, David dismissed the idea of Max having any useful input. He was understandably underwhelmed by seeing him plugged into an old beige desktop computer like an oversized laser printer. That was, until Max's predictions of the next alien sweep came true, down to the minute. While the strange vessels flew overhead in a grid reconnaissance pattern, we were wisely hidden and deathly quiet. David grinned as soon as they were gone. Max had proven himself.
Way to go, Max.
Max's monitor screen contrast shifted back and forth dramatically at the accolade. That was the AI equivalent of blushing, I believe. After that, Major Hubbard and the rest of his officers were very interested in working with their new silicon-based friend. I explained how he had also translated their language and suggested using Morse code to send out the message. For all the effort it took to reconnect his interface, it had paid off. His contributions were absolutely essential to our continued survival. Like most units, the soldiers had varied and complementary skill sets, and the Major was highly efficient at utilizing their talents. Understandably, morale was low prior to connecting with myself and Max. Everyone had lost their families. Hope was gone, but discovering our ambitious efforts gave the troops a reason to keep going. The feeling of lifted spirits was mutually contagious. David and I focused on short-term strategy and survival goals. If the off-grid survivors also made it to Huntsville, we would have the makings of a considerable guerrilla army and adequate human resources to keep going. Mine was typically the voice of hope and unjustified optimism. David, on the other hand, was more of a realist. He thought in terms of what if. His mind actively considered worst-case scenarios, no matter how much it might have brought down our personal momentum. I didn't understand it at the time, but being polar opposites in perspective worked incredibly well for us. We took each other's thoughts into consideration and found middle ground. I assumed Roswell, New Mexico was their home base, or at least a regional hub. It made sense to me for us to build up our numbers, gather up our weapons, and then take the fight to them there. Major Hubbard's unit brought their weapons and gear with them, but what good is a few dozen military rifles against a super colony of giant grasshoppers? David was quick to remind me how hopelessly outclassed and outnumbered we were against an unconventional enemy with conventional weapons. Also, the more of us who traveled together, the greater risk of detection. As much as I hated to admit it, he was right to discourage my headstrong war ideas. It would have been personal suicide to martyr ourselves directly at them with no thought-out plans. We also didn't know if any of the other groups were coming to Huntsville, or how much time it would take. How big could our army become if we waited a little while longer for others to arrive? I was angry because I wanted to act immediately. I feared we might be wiped out if we waited too long to strike. David had been taught the strategic value of choosing the right time to enter a battle. For all my hollow bluster and bravado, I knew we were minimally prepared. His patience bought us something of paramount importance: time. Max, perhaps weary of our spirited debates and indecisiveness, brought the rest.
Gentlemen, I have a very unorthodox idea, but I'd like you to hear me out. Before the internet ceased to be, I did research on the International Space Station on the rhythmic language of Orthoptera, Caelifera, and Ensiphera. That is, terrestrial grasshoppers, locusts, crickets, katydids, and the like. The aliens who have invaded the Earth are undoubtedly related. While a different dialect, the patterns of how they communicate are incredibly similar. What I'm alluding to is that it's good to know our enemy.
David and I looked at each other in perplexed bemusement. Neither of us had any idea where Max was going with his vocabulary-laced diatribe.
Perhaps the language is a poor word for how they actually communicate, but I'm using that terminology here for demonstrative purposes. They don't have specific words or phrases like humans do. Know what I mean? These insects, both terrestrial and the larger interstellar variety, operate more on strong feelings or general commands. While I'm not actually a master of their language, I understand it well enough to follow the conversation.
I followed his thoughts as he slowly offered them, but couldn't fully see where Max was headed with it. David, on the other hand, was grinning like a damned fool. He was a little ahead of me. I could tell there was a stroke of brilliance coming in the narrative that I wanted to understand too.
Without exaggeration, there are tens of billions of these arthropod insects living on Earth. They are tribal. They are highly territorial. Their motivations are simply to mate and to eat. That's pretty much all they care about. Like a disciplined military organization, they have a ranking hierarchy and order. The strongest are followed without question. If I tell them a rival tribe has come here to steal their females and eat their food, they will swarm and fight their alien cousins. Sure, the earthbound varieties of these insects are dozens of times smaller than their highly evolved foreign relatives, but in the massive numbers they possess, they would attack them with a swarm ferocity and effectiveness we couldn't come close to equaling with our limited resources. Swarms of enraged terrestrial grasshoppers and crickets directed at them would unknowingly become our greatest natural allies.
It was sneaky biological warfare in ways we would have never dreamed possible, and just crazy enough to work. It also had the added merit of turning their similar species against each other. Max synthesized the all-out attack command. Meanwhile, David and I discussed the pros and cons of putting our cards all out on the table. There would be no putting the genie back in the bottle. Once the unapologetic call to war was made, it was absolutely won. We were finished playing it safe. Max's organic idea of fighting fire with fire was by far our strongest option. Having an armed escort to the radar station was great. We broadcast Max's diabolic composition on a loop and watched in amazement as actual clouds of winged warriors took flight. I'm not sure how they knew where to go, but westward they flew. In case the aliens came to destroy the source of the uprising against them, David sent several of his officers to nearby radio towers to repeat the rebellion signal in multiple places. We spread the insect propaganda far and wide. In all, we managed to blanket the entire southeastern region of the United States with the sweet, sweet leg scrapings of full-on locust rage. I also transmitted an informative shortwave message on global-wide bandwidth frequencies, explaining Max's creative method of warfare. That, along with the included audio file, would prove incredibly useful to other survivors listening across the world. Witnessing the blitzkrieg of biological warfare and the massive insect-on-insect fireworks over the next few weeks was something I'll never forget. Thankfully, there wasn't a protracted skirmish or necessary involvement from us, because we were woefully unprepared for that. As courageous as it would have been to valiantly lead the charge against them, we simply called on our arthropod allies and kept out of the way. Turns out, earth grasshoppers, locusts, crickets, and katydids really do not want to share their food or females. Lucky us. It's been nearly 18 months since ARMAGEDDON. I'd love to take full credit for saving the planet from deadly space arthropods, but it was Max's clever employment of organic warfare which made it possible. That, and David's grounded approach to the daunting problem facing us. 98% of the human population has been wiped out overnight, but scattered pockets of survivors across the globe will build everything back. I have full confidence in that. We must also prepare for the unpleasant possibility of another attack someday. Just because we repelled these pesky invaders once doesn't mean there won't be another wave of them arriving in the future. There are surely other colonies lurking out there within the cosmos. We must be vigilant to possible retaliation. With future technological advancements, perhaps we can erect a protective force field around the planet to foil future invasions. I have the perfect individual to put on the task. All hail, my best pal Max, the greatest friend to the human race. Commander Ryan Abott, signing off.